right. Welcome to the deep dive. You know how this works. You share the stuff you're curious about, the books, the articles, whatever's got you thinking, and we roll up our sleeves and really get into it.
We're talking extracting the core ideas, the insights that'll make you feel like you've climbed the mountain of knowledge yourself without the actual climb.
Exactly. It's like having your own personal research team, but way more fun.
Yeah.
And today, we're diving into a classic, one that's been helping people tackle worry for, almost a century now. Dale Carnegie's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living.
A timeless choice, and one that honestly never seems to lose its relevance. What's striking, looking at the material you sent, is how much ground this book covers. It's not just about, calming your nerves. It's about those sleepless nights, the financial pressures that can just weigh you down, even finding that sense of purpose and peace in your work. It's a big picture kind of book.
It is. And what's great is Carnegie doesn't just lecture. He brings in all these real-life stories, people from all walks of life who face down worry and come out the other side. It's like instantly relatable,
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we're going to distill what we think are the most potent, most practical principles Carnegie lays out, the stuff that can truly help you, our listener, manage those worries and, honestly, maybe even live a bit more joyfully and effectively.
Sounds like a plan. So right off the bat, Carnegie throws out these fundamental facts about worry. The first one is tied to this guy, Sir William Osler, a name that'll ring a bell for anyone in medicine. He was massively influenced by this quote from Thomas Carlyle. Our main business is not to see what lies dimly at a distance, but to do what lies clearly at hand.
And get this, Osler actually lived by this. He credited this whole idea really being present, focused on what he called day-tight compartments for his, pretty extraordinary success. This is the guy who basically built the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, became a top professor at Oxford, all while saying he had, and I quote, brains of the most mediocre character.
Kind of makes you think, right? Like maybe we get in our own way by constantly projecting into the future or getting stuck in the past. And Carnegie backs this up with a stat that's kind of scary back then. He said half of all hospital beds were filled with people suffering from, nerves, mental troubles, directly linked to dwelling on what's gone and fearing what's coming.
It's a pattern that's, sadly pretty timeless, isn't it?
It is. So the takeaway here is intentionally section off your day, treat each part like its own little compartment. You shut the door on future anxieties, on past regrets, and you give yourself the mental space to really act, to be effective right now.
It's present moment focus, but almost weaponized, like using it to be more productive, more at peace.
Exactly. And Carnegie gives this great example. Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, he was the publisher of the New York Times during World War II. Talk about a high-pressure gig, right? And with the war raging, he was so stressed he couldn't sleep.
And his temporary solution, trying to paint, something he'd never done before, just to keep his mind occupied, anything to stop those thoughts, right?
But the real breakthrough for him wasn't the painting itself. It was stumbling on a line from a hymn. One step enough for me. It's like Osler's day-tight compartments, but even more distilled. Just focus on that very next step.
And taking that one step at a time idea further, Carnegie tells this incredible story about Ted Benjamino, a soldier in World War II, totally crippled by combat fatigue, worried about his duties, his son back home, just consumed by it all. And an army doctor gives him this analogy: life is like an hourglass, right? Full of all these grains of sand. You can't force them all through at once. They have to go one by one.
Such a powerful image. One grain of sand, one task at a time. Benjamino said that advice got him through the war and then helped him in his business career later, too. Proof this isn't just for, life or death stuff. It's for that everyday overwhelm we all feel. What about you, listener? Ever feel like you're trying to force that whole hourglass through all at once?
Now, moving on to something really practical. Carnegie calls it the magic formula for solving worry situations. And it comes from Willis H. Carrier, the guy who invented air conditioning.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about someone who probably had a few problems to solve.
Right. And his approach is, surprisingly simple. 3 steps. First, you figure out the absolute worst thing that could happen, like the worst case scenario. Then you force yourself to accept it, like truly accept that it might happen. And lastly, you calmly try to improve on that worst outcome.
That second step, accepting the worst, it almost sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? Like, if you accept the worst, don't you risk becoming passive? Less likely to actually solve the problem.
That's a great point. But the acceptance here isn't about giving up. It's more like mentally prepping yourself for that worst case scenario so that the fear of it loses its power. You take away its sting, And Carrier himself used this when he had a $20,000 problem, a huge amount back then. By going through this process, he not only mentally prepared for a possible loss, he ended up turning it into a $15,000 profit.
Then Carrier had this insight. Worry just destroys our ability to think straight. When we're all anxious, our minds are racing, we can't focus, we can't make good decisions. But if we confront that worst-case scenario head-on, accept that it might happen, it kind of clears the mental fog. We can start thinking rationally again.
Exactly. And Carnegie gives another example, a New York oil dealer who's being blackmailed. He's agonizing over whether to pay up or risk his business being ruined.
Yeah, classic dilemma. Tough situation.
Right. And he uses Carrier's formula. First, he forces himself to face that worst outcome, his business going under. And in doing that, he realizes even if that happens, it's not the end of the world. He can find other work. And that acceptance, even though it's tough, it calms him down. And suddenly he can think clearly. He talks to his lawyer and they figure out the blackmailer's a wanted criminal. The whole thing gets resolved.
So it's about shifting from this panicked worrying to actual problem-solving thinking.
Right, and then there's Earl P. Haney, diagnosed with incurable ulcers, told he doesn't have long to live. And what does he do? He decides to travel the world, even buys his own casket to take with him.
Wow. That's taking acceptance to a whole new level.
It is. But Haney, faced with what seems like the ultimate bad news, he chooses to really live. He doesn't hold back. And the amazing thing is, he ends up recovering. His health just improves. It really makes you wonder about the link between our minds and our bodies, doesn't it?
It does. And that segues perfectly into Carnegie's next point, what worry may do to you. He quotes this Dr. Alexis Carrel, who says, and this is a direct quote, "Businessmen who do not know how to fight worry die young." It's a pretty blunt warning.
It is.
And Carnegie goes on to talk about the real physical damage worry can do. Heart trouble, indigestion, nervous breakdowns, even angina pectoris, basically. Chest pain caused by stress, reduced blood flow to the heart.
Scary stuff.
It is. But then he contrasts this with what Dr. Carroll noticed, people who managed to stay calm. Even in the craziness of city life, they seemed almost immune to these nervous disorders.
Like their inner peace was somehow protecting them.
Yeah. And then there's Olga K. Jarvie, diagnosed with terminal cancer by, get this, the Mayo brothers themselves. But instead of giving in to despair and worry, she just decided not to. She wouldn't let herself get bogged down by those thoughts.
Talk about willpower.
Right. She's going through intense x-ray treatments. The prognosis is grim, but she forces herself to smile, to stay cheerful. And while she wasn't saying that cured her cancer, she believed it helped her body fight. And she ended up having what everyone considered a miraculous recovery.
It's a powerful story. So worry isn't just some mental thing. It can really impact our bodies. The question is, how do we break free from it before it breaks us? And Carnegie gives us some pretty specific rules to follow. The first one is this: crowd worry out by keeping busy.
And he illustrates this beautifully with the story of Marion J. Douglas. He lost 2 daughters tragically. He was devastated, couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. And then his son asks him to help build a boat.
Simple thing, right?
Yeah, but those 3 hours, totally focused on that task, gave him his first moments of peace in what felt like forever.
He found relief in action.
He did. And it made him realize something. When your mind's fully engaged, when you're really focused on something, it's almost impossible to dwell on worries at the same time. He then made this list of hundreds of household repairs, filled his life with projects, community work, even became chairman of the school board. He basically just ran out of time to worry.
It's like that saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, but flipped around, busy hands, a busy mind, they keep those worries at bay.
Yeah. And this connects to basic psychology. We can only really focus on one thing consciously at a time. You can't be totally engrossed in a task and be consumed by anxious thoughts simultaneously. Carnegie even mentions how Army psychiatrists back in the war, they prescribed activity as a cure for what they called psychoneurotic soldiers, guys who were basically breaking down from the stress of combat.
So not just a folk remedy, it's got some science behind it.
Exactly. And this idea goes way back. The ancient Greeks, the Quakers, they all used something like occupational therapy to help people find peace.
Engaging the mind, engaging the body.
Exactly. And Carnegie gives more examples. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, after his wife died tragically, he found solace in taking care of his kids and translating Dante. Osa Johnson, after her husband died suddenly in a plane crash, she went right back to lecturing, even though she was in a wheelchair. Admiral Byrd, stuck in Antarctica for 5 months, totally isolated, he kept himself sane by planning and doing his daily tasks meticulously. He said, and this is a great quote, "Without purpose, the days would have ended, as such days always end, in disintegration."
Wow. Powerful stuff. So purposeful action is like an antidote to worry, right?
It is. Keeps your mind engaged,
Yep.
stops it from spiraling. And then rule number 2, don't fuss about trifles. This feels so relevant today when everyone's so busy, so stressed about every little thing.
Yeah, we sweat the small stuff, don't we?
We do. And Carnegie, to illustrate this, he tells this story about Rudyard Kipling, the Jungle Book guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how he had this massive lifelong feud with his brother-in-law over a load of hay.
A load of hay. Seriously. Seriously. And it's amazing how much worry, how much resentment it created all over something so trivial. It's like that saying from Pericles, "Come, gentlemen, we sit too long on trifles."
And we do. We let tiny annoyances take up way too much space in our heads.
And then there's this great story from Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick about a giant tree in a forest. This tree had survived centuries of crazy storms, lightning strikes, everything. But what finally brought it down? Tiny little beetles.
They're kidding.
Nope. Fosdick uses it as an analogy for how these small worries, these little beetles, they can eat away at us, destroy our well-being if we let them.
And sometimes it's the little things that get us, isn't it? Like death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. And then there's this guy, Charles Seifert, who was stuck in the woods waiting for a tow truck, surrounded by mosquitoes. And instead of getting all frustrated and stressed, he decided to make a whistle. It's just a great reminder that we can choose how we react to these little annoyances. Like Carnegie says, life is too short to be little.
Okay, rule number 3 brings in a bit of logic. Use the law of averages. And Carnegie starts by talking about his own childhood worries. Things that, looking back, seem pretty funny, like being terrified of being buried alive or struck by lightning.
Universal kid fears.
Right. But the point is, most of the things we worry about never actually happen. And Carnegie says, when worry creeps in, look at the odds. What are the chances of this thing you're scared of actually happening?
It's putting worry through reality check, right?
Yeah. He even mentions Lloyd's of London, the big insurance market. They made a fortune by betting against these rare disasters that people are always worried about. He then compares the danger of being in a major battle like Gettysburg with the actual death rate during peacetime. It's about putting things in perspective.
So when you find yourself worrying, ask yourself, what does the data say?
Exactly. And he tells the story of Clyde W. Moss, a sailor on a ship that gets torpedoed. He's freaking out, obviously. But he gets his hands on the Navy's data on survival rates for torpedoed ships. And knowing the odds, even though they weren't great, it actually calmed him down.
It's like knowledge is power, even when it comes to worry.
Totally. Okay, rule number 4 is about acceptance. Cooperate with the inevitable. And Carnegie tells this story from his own childhood about accidentally tearing off his finger. He was in shock, obviously, but then he just accepted it. It was done.
It's a tough one, but sometimes that's all you can do, right?
It is. This rule is about recognizing the stuff you can't change.
Yeah.
And choosing to accept it instead of fighting a losing battle. It's like that inscription on the Amsterdam Cathedral. It is so. It cannot be otherwise.
Surrender, but in a wise kind of way.
Exactly. And William James, the psychologist, he said, acceptance of what has happened is the first step to overcoming the consequence of any misfortune. Carnegie gives the example of Elizabeth Conley, whose nephew was killed in the war. She was devastated, but eventually she came to accept it. And then there's this sailor on the USS Pinafore who had to handle explosives. He was terrified, but he mentally prepared himself for the worst. And that acceptance actually helped him stay calm and do his job.
It's like mentally rehearsing for the worst case scenario so that you're not caught off guard if it actually happens.
Even the ancient philosophers were onto this. Socrates, on his deathbed, the jailer tells him, try to bear lightly what needs must be. And then there's that serenity prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Powerful stuff.
Really is. So acceptance isn't about being passive. It's about choosing your battles wisely, knowing when to let go.
Okay, rule number 5 introduces an interesting concept. Put a stop-loss order on your worries. And he talks about spending 2 years writing a novel that turned out to be, well, not good. And he just decided to write it off as a loss and move on.
Like cutting your losses in the stock market.
Exactly. And it's about deciding how much mental and emotional energy you're willing to invest in a worry. And then, when you hit that limit, just stopping. Like Henry David Thoreau said, the cost of a thing is the amount of what I call life, which is required to be exchanged for it. Sometimes we're paying way too high a price for our worries.
It's a great analogy, and Carnegie contrasts this with Gilbert and Sullivan. They had this lifelong feud over the price of a carpet. They just couldn't let it go. Compared to, say, Abraham Lincoln, who famously forgave his enemies.
It's about choosing forgiveness over resentment, choosing to move on.
And Carnegie tells about Jack Dempsey, the boxer, after he lost his title. He didn't dwell on it. He just lived his life. He said, and I love this quote, "I have had a better time during the last 10 years than I had when I was champion."
Wow. And even some prisoners in Sing Sing, they find peace by writing off their misfortunes. It's like that line from Omar Khayyam, "The moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on."
The past is the past. We can't change it.
Exactly. Which brings us to rule number 6, which is really a summary of everything we've talked about. Let the past bury its dead. Don't saw sawdust. It's such a vivid image, right? Sawing sawdust, it's pointless. You're just going over the same old ground.
Just getting stuck in a rut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So these 6 rules, they give us a framework for breaking free from worry. Focus on the present, accept what you can't change, use logic, let go of the past, don't sweat the small stuff.
It's a solid plan.
It is. And now Carnegie moves on to something even more proactive, cultivating a mindset that brings peace and happiness. He starts with what he calls 8 words that can transform your life. And he quotes Emerson, "A man is what he thinks about all day long."
It's all about the power of thought, right?
It is. And Marcus Aurelius said something very similar. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Our thoughts create our reality.
If we're constantly thinking negative thoughts, we're going to experience a more negative reality.
Exactly. And Carnegie makes this distinction between concern and worry. He uses the example of crossing a busy street. Concern is acknowledging the danger and being careful. Worry is just freaking out without taking action.
It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Right. And he gives the example of Lowell Thomas. He was always calm, even in the face of serious problems. It's about choosing how you respond.
Right. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it.
And Carnegie's next section is all about how to cultivate a mental attitude that brings peace and happiness. He says we have to fill our minds with positive thoughts, thoughts of peace, courage, health, hope. And he tells this story about a guy who had a nervous breakdown from worry. And his dad wrote him a letter quoting the Bible. "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." And that helped him realize that it wasn't his circumstances that were the problem. It was his perspective.
It's about recognizing the power of our own thoughts.
And Montaigne said something similar. "A man is not hurt so much by what happens as by his opinion of what happens."
Our thoughts create our feelings.
And William James, the psychologist, he said that while we can't directly control our feelings, we can control our actions, and our actions influence our feelings. He called it the sovereign voluntary path to cheerfulness. Act as if you're already cheerful, and eventually you will be.
Fake it till you make it, basically.
Kind of. And he gives some really practical tips. Smile, stand tall, take deep breaths, sing, hum. These little things can actually shift your mood.
It's about creating a positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah. And he contrasts this complaining widow with how she could change her whole outlook just by acting cheerful. He also tells about H.J. Englert, who recovered from nephritis, a serious kidney disease, by focusing on the positive and being cheerful. And then there's that classic story about the guy who complained about having no shoes until he saw a man with no feet.
Perspective is everything.
It is. Eddie Rickenbacker, when he was lost at sea, he learned to appreciate the simple things: food, water, shelter. And then there's this wounded sergeant in Guadalcanal who, when he finds out he'll live and be able to talk, he wonders what he was even worrying about before. Carnegie says, focus on the 90% of things that are right in your life and ignore the 10% that are wrong. Think and thank.
It's about choosing gratitude over complaint.
And Jonathan Swift, he talked about the best doctors. Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Merriman. It's about taking care of yourself and having a positive outlook.
It sounds simple, but it's profound, right?
It is. And Schopenhauer said, we seldom think of what we have, but always of what we lack. And that lack is what creates unhappiness.
It's like we're wired to focus on the negative.
We are. And Carnegie tells about John Palmer, this grumpy guy who's totally transformed after a disabled veteran, pointed out all the things he had to be grateful for. And Lucille Blake, she had to spend a year in bed because of a heart condition, and she ended up being so grateful for that time. It's about actively choosing gratitude.
And taking responsibility for our own attitude, right? Like Epictetus said, people are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them.
So true. And then Carnegie ends this section with this idea of turning lemons into lemonade.
Yeah.
He gives 2 reasons to do this. 1, you might actually succeed. And 2, even the effort itself will change you for the better.
It's about being proactive in the face of challenges.
Exactly. And he uses the analogy of Ole Bull, the violinist, who finished a concert piece on 3 strings after his A string broke. He didn't give up, he adapted. And Harry Emerson Fosdick said, that is life, to have your A string snap and finish on 3 strings. And lastly, he quotes William Bleetho, The most important thing in life is not to capitalize on your gains. Any fool can do that. The really important thing is to profit from your losses. That requires intelligence, and it makes the difference between a man of sense and a fool.
Wow, that's deep. So it's not about avoiding loss, it's about learning from it.
Exactly. Now, Carnegie has a whole section on how to cure melancholy in 14 days, based on Alfred Adler's ideas. And he tells this incredible story about C.R. Burton, who lost both his parents when he was young and faced all sorts of hardship. But he focused on helping others. He took care of his younger sisters, found them homes, and always tried to stay positive.
He found meaning in serving others.
He did. And Adler's prescription for melancholy is to take a genuine interest in other people. Forget about yourself by focusing on others.
It's about shifting your focus outward.
Exactly. And then there's a section on the importance of God. Carnegie talks about the health benefits of religious activity and faith. He quotes Jesus' message of living an abundant life and loving God and your neighbor.
It's about finding peace and purpose through faith.
And he includes a quote from John Bailey about what makes someone a Christian. It's not just about believing certain things. It's about having a certain spirit, living a certain way. And William James, the psychologist, he found himself relying more and more on God as he got older. Carnegie tells this moving story about Mary Cushman, who was struggling with poverty during the Depression. And through prayer and reading the Bible, she found peace and strength. He also tells about John R. Anthony, a discouraged book salesman who found guidance and renewed confidence through prayer and reading the Gideon Bible in his hotel room.
Powerful stuff. It's about finding comfort and strength in something bigger than yourself.
It is. And then there's a section on how to keep from worrying about insomnia. Carnegie points out that worrying about not sleeping is often what keeps us awake. It's a vicious cycle.
Makes sense. If you're lying there thinking, I need to sleep, you're probably not going to sleep.
Exactly. He recommends Dr. David Harold Fink's advice on physical relaxation, talking to your body, telling yourself to let go, using pillows for support.
It's about calming the mind by calming the body.
And he even suggests physical exhaustion as a cure. He talks about Theodore Dreiser curing his insomnia by working on the railroad. And Carnegie himself says he was once so tired he fell asleep while walking.
Wow.
Yeah. And Dr. Foster Kennedy noticed that soldiers often fell asleep instantly from exhaustion. He also recommends this technique of rolling your eyes upward to induce sleep.
Interesting.
The main takeaway here is your body needs sleep. Worrying about it just makes it worse. Eventually, you'll fall asleep. No one's ever died from refusing to sleep.
True. Nature will take over eventually.
And we should mention that Carnegie also has sections in the book on how to find the kind of work in which you may be happy and successful and how to lessen your financial worries. We don't have the specific content for those, but
they show how practical this book is. It's not just about managing worry in general. It's about tackling those big areas of life that often cause us stress.
Exactly. And lastly, there's this huge section called How I Conquered Worry, where Carnegie shares tons of real-life stories from people who've overcome worry. It's like a whole collection of inspiration and practical tips. We hear from C.I. Blackwood, Roger W. Babson, Senator Elmer Thomas, J.C. Penney, Jack Dempsey, Connie Mack, Gene Autry, Reverend William Wood, and so many more. It's amazing how diverse these stories are.
It's like worry doesn't discriminate, right? It affects everyone, but everyone also has the potential to overcome it.
Exactly. There's this one story about RVC Bodley, who found peace and contentment living in the Sahara Desert.
Yeah.
He learned this idea of happy resignation from the Arabs, which is such a contrast to our always-on-the-go Western culture. And Professor William Lyon Phelps, he lists 5 things that help him banish worry: living with enthusiasm, reading good books, physical activity, avoiding hurry and tension, and giving yourself time for troubles to work themselves out.
It's a whole toolkit for dealing with worry. So, to wrap up this deep dive into Dale Carnegie, what stands out is that his advice is timeless. It's about living in the present, accepting what we can't change, taking action, being grateful, and choosing a positive outlook.
Exactly. So for you, listener, which of these principles resonates with you? Which of Carnegie's rules, which of these stories might be most helpful for you in your own life?
And one last thought to leave you with. Given all these stories of overcoming worry, what small change, what tiny shift in your thinking or your actions might be the key to reducing your own worries? What are the little beetles in your life that you might be able to tackle?
Think about it. And until next time, happy diving.
Happy diving.